All right, good morning. How are we today? Doing well? I hope you guys are staying cool. Thanks for being here. Well, it was a cold November morning, and I was on my way to high school. And just to give you some context, I went to high school in this little town in the middle of Kansas called Hutchinson. And our family, my senior year, moved outside of the city a little bit. And so in order to get to school, I had to drive back into town, which was okay because it was a straightaway that had a speed limit of 55. And so as I'm driving on this cold November morning, all of a sudden I look in my rearview mirror and I think, oh no, there's an ambulance right behind me. So I'm like, I got to do my duty. I got to pull over to the side of the road. But then I was a little bewildered because as I'm pulling over to the shoulder, it's like the ambulance is following me too. And I still didn't get it, so I'm thinking oh no, is the accident right here? Am I pulling right in front of it? And literally, it didn't really hit me until all of a sudden I saw the car door open and I realized, oh, this is not an ambulance. This is the sheriff in a Silverado, just a little bit higher up. So, it's kind of like that. You remember that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where they open up the pit and Salah's oh, the ground is moving, come on, Salah, we all know it was snakes. Stop being dumb. That was me with the sheriff. I should have known, but I didn't. Now, the surprising thing to me was that for the previous 3 months, I had been driving 75 to 90 miles an hour in this 55 zone every day, and nothing bad had happened to me. So I was shocked when all of a sudden, I have somebody holding me to account on it. So he comes up, he's like, hey, I clocked you going 77, which, a little relieved, and then he wrote me a ticket for $190, which might as well have been $19,000 to me when I was 18 years old. Because, I was making $330, not a week, but a month at the local public library shelving books. So I'm like, this is going to take the better part of all of my money. It's all going to be gone right here. And I'll just be honest with you, I remember driving to school, getting home that evening, and for the next week just feeling completely stuck. I mean, I know it's not the scariest situation in life. I mean, there's worse things, but I just remember it being such a helpless feeling. The better part of my monthly pay was now going to go to fix a problem of my own making that, let's just be real, it's not going to add any value to my life. So my question is, what does it take for you to feel stuck? I'm talking about the hope feels like it's been completely sucked out of the room and you are on your own. Or maybe there's a project due on Friday and it is Wednesday afternoon and you should be doing finishing touches, but instead you're 10% of the way in. Or maybe the engine in your car blows and now you have to replace that car, but you're still paying on it, and so now it's man, do I have 2 payments for one vehicle? Or maybe it's this. Years of pretending it's not a problem, that you can totally manage this, that it's not a big deal. It blows up in your face. Next thing you know, your wife finds out, your parents are so hurt that they won't call you back, your kids look at you like you are a failure. What does it take for you to feel stuck? In our culture, we honor those who can seemingly rescue themselves. Whether it's somebody who picks them up by their own bootstraps or they failed, but then they were able to work on it and get take care of their deficits and reach that goal. We love to celebrate those types of people, right? But we also kind of roll our eyes at the born on third base person, where it's I managed an $8 million company. It only took a $12 million loan from my mom and dad, right? We kind of roll our eyes at those kind of people. And what I'm saying, though, is there will come a point in your life where you cannot rescue yourself, that you are completely on your own, where that bill is too high, and you can't meet that deadline. Or you don't have the right education, or you did screw up too much, and the bridges have been burned. And when that happens, where do you turn? What do you do? Where do you turn? And how do you cope when your hope is diminished and you can't seem to save yourself? Now, for Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth, which this is the final week of our 4-part series through this Old Testament book, This is where they lived, in a position of just feeling completely stuck. 4 weeks ago, we started this journey, and when we started, Naomi was an Israelite from Bethlehem who follows her husband to the foreign land of Moab because of a famine back in Bethlehem. And while she's there, her husband dies. Her 2 sons marry Moabite women, and then her sons die. So now, Naomi is a stranger in a foreign land that does not like her, tasked with providing not just for herself, but for her sons' 2 widows. And this is in a time and an age where women had no rights, no options. She is completely on her own. And Naomi should be justified in feeling hopeless and helpless to try and solve this. In fact, she even changes her name at the beginning of the book. She says, "My name, Naomi, it means pleasant, but do not call me that because that feels like an insult. Call me Mara, because Mara means bitter, and frankly, that is the hand that God has dealt me." She has no husband, no heirs, and no hope. But what she doesn't realize is that everything is about to change when her daughter-in-law, Ruth, refuses to leave and go back to Moab, but instead says, "I will go, wherever you stay, I will stay. I will be with you until the bitter end." And unbeknownst to both of them, God begins working in the background. Because Ruth goes to work at a local farm, and as she is working at this local farm, really as a beggar, picking up the leftovers of a harvest, the field owner takes pity on her and says, "I want to make sure that you get just a little bit more than everyone else," and starts sending her home with more. And then it's revealed by Naomi, her mother-in-law, that the field owner, Boaz, is what's called a family redeemer, which means that in this time and day and age, there was a provision for allowing and ensuring the survival of a family afflicted by the untimely death of a patriarch. So here's how this would work out. First of all, God designed it for eternal land rights to stay within certain tribes and certain clans. Meaning, if you were short on money, you could mortgage your farm, you could lease it to somebody else, but then at some point you could either buy it back, or at the year of Jubilee, it would be returned to you. And so what would happen is a family member, if you didn't have the money and if you didn't have the husband or the children to redeem the land back, another member of your clan or your tribe could step in and redeem it for you. And this is who Boaz was. Boaz, the field owner that took so much pity on Ruth, just so happened to be Naomi and Ruth's family redeemer. And so chapter 3, where we finished last week, it ends with Ruth swiping right on Boaz and saying, "I think you would be a great redeemer for me. Let's make this official." And what happens is Boaz is interested. And when he hears this, he's like, "I would love to marry you, but there's one person who actually is a closer relative than me. And frankly, he has first right of refusal before I can actually marry you." So this is where chapter 4 starts today. It says in verse 1 of Ruth 4, "Boaz went to the town gate, and he took a seat there. Just then the family redeemer, the other guy who has a closer relationship than he does to Ruth and Naomi, he had mentioned came by. So Boaz called out to him, 'Come over and sit down, friend. I want to talk to you.' So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses." So in this day and age, the gate acted like the local courthouse. So legal matters, they'd be dealt there. And so if you're this family member, you've got to be thinking, nothing good is about to happen. Because if any of you ever had a good conversation with somebody that started with, "Hey, I need some witnesses. Let's get some other people over here," it usually does not go well. And so he had to have been a little bit relieved when, verse 3, it says, "And Boaz said to the family redeemer, 'You know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, let me know right away, because I am next in line to redeem it after you.' So the man replied, 'All right, I will redeem it.' Because from his perspective, he's thinking, 'Oh yeah, Naomi, didn't her husband and her sons all die? So if I redeem her land, what's going to happen is this is just going to get grafted into the rest of my estate. It's like, so that's a great deal for me. He's interested. He wants to expand his inheritance. He wants to expand what he's going to pass on to his family. And I'm sure that Boaz was probably hoping, like, I was hoping he'd back out, that maybe he won't have the money. But apparently he does. And then in verse 5 it says, then Boaz told him, of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family. Then I can't redeem it, the family redeemer replied, because this might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it. So just put this in terms that maybe we can understand. He's like, if I marry Ruth and I provide an heir, this is going to complicate the inheritance I was hoping to keep in my family's name and to pass on to my children. Because if I bring another family into this and I'm trying to keep alive another limb of the family tree, then this is going to be bad for my own children. And there's a little bit of a deep irony here, because as we read this, we literally do not know this man's name. He is just anonymous family redeemer. But his motivation here is, I don't want to complicate what I'm going to pass along, or in other words, I want future generations to remember my name, not Elimelech's name or his son's name. I want them to remember my name. And we don't know who his name is. We don't even know who this guy is. Like, his protection to provide for his own pride prevented him from actually being the source of hope within the story. But there's still one more order of business to attend to. Because in order for Boaz to officially take the place of the other guy, they need to sign the docs. So in their culture, everything was solidified by passing off of a sandal. So, just think of your favorite sandal you have at home, whether it's a rainbow or a croc. Like, just imagine, like, this is how you're going to seal the deal. So it says, now in those days, it was the custom in Israel for anyone transferring a right of purchase to remove his croc and hand it to the other party. Now this publicly validated the transaction. So the other family redeemer drew off his croc, and he said to Boaz, no, you buy the land. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but let's just be honest for a second. 2 generations ago, business was done in this country with, but we literally grabbed hands and shook them up and down. I mean, like, we all have our own little funny things. And frankly, it's not that much better today. Our system is just kind of as dumb. It's like, hey, I wrote my name with some soft curves, and so that means that, like, I'm committing to this deal. And frankly, if you ever sign your name on, like, a DocuSign, come on now. How is that, like, much different than handing off your sandal, right? Like, I checked the box. It looks kind of like my name. If I actually have to sign it, it's just an X with, like, a line next to it. It's weird. It's weird. And so this is also a little weird, but let's not have some chronological snobbery to think like, we're so much more advanced than they are. They handed off a crock, we sign our names. So Ruth chapter 4, verse 9, it says, then Boaz said to the elders and to the crowd standing around, you are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. And with the land I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way, she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today. And from this moment forward, Boaz is now the redeemer of this family that has been living in this helpless and hopeless situation. Every now and then we receive a little bit of grace that we just don't deserve. That somebody comes in and they rescue us when frankly, like, you had no business being rescued. See, when I was 18 and I got that speeding ticket, I had 30 days to pay it, which meant that I was going to take all 30 days to try and save up as much money as I could. And I remember a couple of weeks into that 30 days, my Aunt Sue comes to visit, and I tell her the story, and she looks at me and says, I'll pay it. And I'm like, well, why? And she's like, well, when I was your age, I got a lot of speeding tickets, And I just wish that somebody would have helped me out with all that. And so she's like, I know the stress. I just want to help you out. And in retrospect, I look back on it, it's like such a small deal, but it meant a lot. And it wasn't even about the money, it was about that relief of feeling like this helpless situation where I did not have the money and I didn't know how I was going to put it together was suddenly going to be course corrected. And for Ruth in her life, she went from feeling completely helpless and hopeless, and that she was just going to live out the rest of her life trying to take care of her mother-in-law. This has now been completely reversed. She's no longer impoverished, she's wealthy. She's no longer alone, but in love. She's no longer in despair, but now she has a little bit of hope. And something else that I think we should just acknowledge is that in this day and age, the Moabites to the Israelites were maligned. That this was not a happy relationship. In the eyes of the people of Bethlehem, she was an outsider. She was an other. And I'm sure that every time she went to the market, every time that she went in public, every time she did anything where she had to interact with somebody else from Bethlehem, she was reminded, I am not one of you. And in fact, we know this because it's always referring to her as Ruth the Moabite. That was the label that she carried around for everybody. And now she is no longer maligned, she is no longer an outsider, but she is going to be part and integral and inside of a family that is so incredibly important to the fabric of Bethlehem. And it actually says that God allows Ruth to conceive, and she gives birth to a son. And this is where it goes in verse 13. It says, so Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. And when he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, praise the Lord, who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons. Now, quick time out on this. Don't lose who they say this to. This isn't, hey, Ruth, listen up. Praise the Lord who's now provided a redeemer. To Naomi, praise the Lord. And it says in verse 16, Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if he were her own. And the neighbor women said, now at last, Naomi has a son again. And they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. You know, the book is named Ruth. One of the heroes is named Boaz. But really, this is the story of Naomi's redemption. If you're not familiar, David ends up becoming the great king of Israel. Most of the Psalms are written by him. He is one that the Israelites would always look back to as when David was on the throne, we were at our peak. And the book starts with 3 funerals, and it ends with a wedding and a birth. And at the beginning, Naomi believes God is against her. He's been so cruel to me. She probably goes in depression over this. And frankly, out of everybody that's in this book, everybody had like a little bit of hope, right? Like Ruth was still young enough. She could have gone back home. She could have married somebody if she ever just worked up the courage to do so. Boaz, he was wealthy and had a farm. But Naomi, there was nothing hopeful about her life. She would be on the verge of despair forever. And although the events of this last chapter don't entirely make up for her husband dying and her sons passing away, but it's also really clear God has a plan. And what did Naomi say? She said at the beginning, don't call me pleasant. My name is better as bitter, because that is what God has done to me. But what we see here as we start to wrap up the book is that even when you give up on God, He does not give up on you. See, redemption is restoring what is lost. The story of Ruth is about how no situation is ever completely hopeless when God is involved. Naomi walked through her journey, and yeah, there were some missteps, but there were some key moments of faithfulness as well. Boaz is a redeemer to Ruth, but Obed, the baby, is actually Naomi's redeemer. Because of Obed, the memory of her husband and her sons would not die. They would be passed on through this child. See, when it comes to seeing how God could redeem, she encouraged and she coached Ruth along the way. And I just kind of wonder, how many sleepless nights did Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz have? Each of them had reason to despair. Ruth is like, maybe my one shot at love and family is gone. Boaz is thinking, I might die without any heirs. Naomi, God gave and he took away. But none of them can actually see that God was working in the background. That even when you give up on God, he does not give up on you. But we should also acknowledge that Boaz had some hard choices to make. See, marrying Ruth meant that he could share his family with relatives that maybe he wasn't even that close to. That Naomi was in debt. The fact that he has to redeem the land means that there was a mortgage on the property. And that meant that he would have to pay money just to marry Ruth. But every step of the way, Boaz chose to do the right thing over the easy thing. And frankly, for us, we need to remember the right choice is always better than a seemingly easy choice. It's always greater than the easy choice. And too often we're just so concerned with which one's going to cause me the least amount of grief, which one's going to be the easiest on me, which one is going to make my life right. But let us be people who choose to make the right choice over the easy choice. Now, there's one other layer for us to consider as well. See, the story of Ruth and Boaz as the family redeemer is a shadow of a greater epic that we need to acknowledge. See, whereas Ruth and Naomi were redeemed by Boaz, we gather this morning because we have been redeemed by Christ. And frankly, Jesus is the greater Boaz. Redemption requires a payment. Although for us, being redeemed by Jesus, it feels free because we express how we need him to forgive us, but we need to remember, it cost him much. To be a family redeemer, Boaz had to be a flesh and blood relative to Naomi and a son. But Jesus, he made himself like us, taking on the flesh and blood of humanity to be our Redeemer. Boaz had to pay money to redeem Naomi and Ruth, but Jesus had to allow himself to be pierced, bloodied, and crucified. It is not cheap grace, because it cost him his life. Yet on the other side of his resurrection, there is redemption for us. And on the other side of redemption, there is the chance of a new identity for us. Sometimes people can accuse the Bible of racism, but I'll just be honest, that's a little lazy. Because the Bible will show the racism of some of the characters and people in the Bible while also refuting it. Because Ruth is referred to as the Moabitess, but this is way out of her control. She could not control that. And they used that label to keep her in a place of being lesser and a smaller member of society. See, the Israelites, they saw the Moabites as the byproduct of an incestuous relationship, and they're like, we want to make sure that they always remember that they are different. But I just want to show that within the lineage of King David and in the lineage of ultimately Jesus, you have this Moabite woman. But God is saying, I don't keep track of those kinds of labels. That's not what is important to me. That I can redeem any situation, even the ones that are imposed on you by society. But at the same time, let's acknowledge that there would have been a weight that Ruth would have felt day in and day out, and that wasn't going to change the side of their culture. And so by removing her from that place of feeling like she was lesser and elevating her to a place, it was a message to people, but it also was a relief to her. And what I'm trying to say is that for us in this day and age, your past no longer needs to define you, but instead it can amplify the power of your redemption. Your helpless situation shows that the Redeemer is greater than anything that could possibly stand in your way. See, when you tell the story of your redemption, it's a testament to how loved by God you were. And so some of you might feel like you're in a place of decision right now, that your life has not been defined by good things. Instead, it feels like they are bitter things. And that you feel helpless and hopeless either because of mistakes done to you, or mistakes of your own making, or labels that are unfairly put on you. And what God wants you to know is, I am willing and ready to redeem any situation that I've been working in the background, potentially to lead you to this moment right here. Some of you might be standing at a crossroads where I can either choose the easy thing or I can choose the right thing. And the right thing has the potential to cost you something, whether it's reputation, money, time, energy, whatever it is. And in your heart of hearts, you know that's the right thing. But the easy thing just seems so much better. And nobody's even going to look twice if I go this direction. But you know within your heart of hearts, there's a right choice that's better. And my prayer for us today is that we will see that the Redeemer, who has come to pull us out of our helpless and hopeless situation, is also there to empower us to make the right decision, even if it looks like it might cost us something. The story of Ruth is a story of hope. That no situation is too far gone, no person is too mired in their own situation for God to rescue them out. That two potentially impoverished, maybe even somewhat homeless women are now being elevated back to a place of position within Bethlehem. And for us, if you said yes to Jesus, then he is ready and willing to elevate you as well to his own family. And so I want to pray with you right now. God, I'm asking as we see some of the truths from the life of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, the God, that you would impress upon us the next steps that we should take. The God, whether it is saying yes to you for the very first time, of saying, God, I'm asking you to forgive me my sins, take full control of my life, or whether it's, God, I'm choosing to do the right thing over the easy thing. The God, that you would continue to speak hope and truth into us and give us the motivation to do the right thing, even when it's hard. So God, we trust you. We thank you for our redemption. And we thank you for your son, Jesus, more than anything else. I pray in his name, amen.